I'm your host, Professor Hicks, and welcome back. I missed all of you and have been away for quite some time. As you might know, for those who are still following, hopefully I have still some followers. I have been off, and my last broadcast was on the Pequot Massacre, and I hope that was informing for many of you, particularly those who celebrate Thanksgiving, and also for those who mourn on Thanksgiving. So I hope it was some information that provided you with some information that you hadn't had before. So I'm glad to be back. It's been quite some time, a lot of water under the bridge. Much has transpired on our political front, and much has transpired socially. Um, I like to get started and talk about the political climate, and as most of us are still under the auspices of President Trump and his cohorts, and doesn't appear that anything has changed much since Thanksgiving, except for it appears the president is losing some of his, how would I call it, some of his backers. All right, we see now that the Republicans are very slowly peeling away from some of the more austere, or should I say, more of the, excuse me, they are peeling away from more of his austere, or should I say, just quite obnoxious and crazy legislation. Today, I understand that they broke away from him to sign a floor document, or a document that they used to bring to the floor of the Senate and the House and Congress, detailing that people who are going to be receiving their monthly insurance entitlements beginning in January are going to see a massive increase. So, as such, many Republicans joined some Democrat in trying to bring to the floor a resolution that will, should I say, halt or delay the ending of the Obamacare medical provisions. So that shows some signs that maybe the Republicans are beginning to see that hitching your cart to this horse called Trump is going to have some very poor effects for you when the midterms come around. And I believe that's why we see many of them jumping ship. All right, so that's just some of what's going on. Let's talk about what we're going to be doing. So we're changing our series. We're still following up with the upcoming celebration of the semi-quincentennial, or 250 years of independence, or when the Declaration of Independence was signed. It's very clear about that. This celebration is only celebrating 250 years of the independence from 1776 till now. As such, celebrations and different types of events will be occurring. More recently, I've been discussing the documentary "The American Revolution" by Ken Burns, which I pretty much I didn't watch everything because some of it is just retelling some of the stuff that is just this just bores me to death, and sometimes angers me because, again, if we don't tell our story, no one will. And it was like one of the segments talked about the amount of the amount of colonial people that joined the British in fighting against the Patriots. Okay, so we will call them loyalists, and that these loyalists not only joined the British but fought with the British against their own neighbors, the Patriots. And they talked about the different armed British groups that were named by the British that had the distinction, who made distinctions during the Revolutionary War on the side of the Brits. And never did they mention another group of Americans who joined the British, and it was called the British Ethiopian Brigade. And these were black men who fought against their own countrymen because they knew that slavery was not going to end, and as such, fought to remain free, joining the British in the thousands. But this was not brought out in Ken Burns' documentary. They named every group: the Irish immigrants, the Italian immigrants, the Catholics, because in this time you should understand that there not only was an animosity against African people, but there was animosity against different religious groups. All right, so if you were a Catholic coming into America in the 16th century, you had a problem. Okay, you had a problem. Catholics were not welcomed as the Protestants were. All right, this country saw themselves as a colonial product of Britain, which was a Protestant religious camp. So Catholics who came here were looked with suspicion, as well as the Irish. And that's why many of the Catholic, Irish, and Scottish people joined together sometimes for emancipation from indentured servitude and for Africans from slavery. All right, so we need to understand that today, or should I say our discussion going forward for the next week or so, is going to be Black resistance against American independence. Just Black resistance against American independence. America's independence, we should know, is not what we hear about over the last 100 or 200 years, which seems to favor patriotism, independence, and freedom. This is what the typical standard proclamations that are made by historians, teachers, administrators, the president, and this revolution or this independence is portrayed as such, that we were looking for independence, that we were looking for freedom. Or should I say not we, but the founding fathers. So racism, Black resistance against American independence, we'll be discussing a number of resistant movements during and after the American Revolution or the American fight for independence. Everyone knows about John Brown, which was, of course, after the Revolution. All right. Everybody has heard about DeMarc Vesey and Gabriel Prosser. And most importantly, Nat Turner. And these are very, very important to understanding America's values, its slave laws, its progression up until even today, its development. These are very important, but there are other things that should be considered. Because all of these movements were movements resistant against being enslaved. Again, resistant against being enslaved. And how about the more unknown rebellions and conflicts that help shape this draconian slave laws and the codes, the behaviors, and the attitudes of psychopathy of racism? How about the more unknown ones? And how about even further than that? How about the lasting effects? Because we're going to talk about causes, but of the lasting effects of these resistant movements. We're going to talk about independence and what were the real and personal goals of this much ballyhooed push to American independence. Yes, we all know about patriotism. We all know about freedom. And we all know about independence. But there's much more to it than that. As one of the historians who was speaking in the documentary by Ken Burns called The American Revolution, she stated that the whitewash or the papering over of the realities of the American Revolution as ideals of freedom and patriotism is unfair to you, to me, and to the general public. Because that is not all. Matter of fact, I posit that the American Revolution was nothing more than another fight like the Civil War over slavery. And we'll talk about that and we'll come to that. The American Revolution was violent and oppressive. And the forming of the United States based on this Declaration of Independence was done through violence, subjugation, and white supremacy. I want to say that again. The United States, as it was formed, was not based on liberation, was not based on freedom, was not based on independence, but it was based on slavery. And the United States was formed through this violence of slavery, through the subjugation of its people, and particularly white supremacy. In our series, we will discuss the causes and effects of these black resistant movements. How did these rebellions affect the white population, their attitudes, their behaviors in colonial times and today? You will see that some of what we were experiencing with our fearless leader, Donald Trump, some of the things we experience as relates to massacres, some of the things we experience as relates to police shooting black people and brown people, all of these things are still and are related based on the black resistant movements during these times. We're going to talk about some of the causes to revolution and the subsequent independence that are rarely revealed. Causes that are rarely revealed other than the standard that we hear all the time: freedom, democracy, and patriotism. How many people really understand that every founding father, almost all of them, did not believe in democracy? John Adams talked about it after receiving the Constitution, the Constitution that was written secretly by the Philadelphians during the Constitutional Convention. And in their Constitution was something about democracy. And John Adams, along with many other founding fathers, said this is preposterous to include the word democracy. Why? Because they understand that democracy means people rule. And there was not a scintillating evidence in any of their rhetoric, their documents, their writing, that they wanted to have people rule. White folks, much like black folks, are also misunderstood about their history or do not know it. Because I believe if they did and understood it as I think they should, they would know that these founding fathers never, ever thought that you should be in charge or in control of yourselves or in control of the politics that would require for you to be managed civilly. Yes, people to be managed civilly under good politics. They never included, not just forget the blacks, the women, and the Indians, but they never included the regular people. Many of them turned on revolutionary principles because they didn't think that was a part of what they wanted. So the founding fathers, we all know, were racist. We all know most of them were slave owners, but we don't know that it was nothing. Their push to independence had nothing to do with freedom and democracy. It was over slavery. And we will see that as this particular series unfolds. All right, so we're going to start out, and tomorrow I'll be on broadcasting, so I will be now going back to regular. I know I've probably lost some viewers. I'm not really concerned about that. I'm just hoping some of my subscribers stayed with me over the holidays, and we can get back to it. But we're going to start tomorrow discussing one of the most important of these slave-resistant movements called the Stono Rebellion. Yes, the Stono Rebellion. This was a very, very important, I should say one of the most important slave revolts of the colonial era. Now, when I mention colonial era, folks, but understand, I'm only talking about the period between 1600 and to 1776, when no longer were we colonies after 1776, we became a United States. So I'm talking about the period leading up to that on the Stoner Rebellion, but later we're going to talk about other periods that after the American Revolution, some of the black resistant movements. And they were needed because, as you will see, that after the American Revolution, after winning their freedom, they subjugated blacks, Native Americans, white women, even more than they were before the American Revolution. So the American Revolution was not a good thing for black people. It did not help us whatsoever. Celebrating the 4th of July for us should be criminal. So we're going to talk more about that. All right? So without further ado, I'm going to let you folks go. You wonderful people who stood in with me. Hope you're still there for me. Remember, we're moving forward on a new topic, Black resistance and versus American independence and what happened. And we're going to talk more about that. And with that said, and I will give you my old goodbye, and that is Ashe, and have a wonderful rest of the day.